We're looking at Evan's forehand here, and one of the things that he wants to work on is to keep his racket face either closed or just neutral on contact point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through a few of his forehands in a little bit slower motion so that everybody can see what I'm seeing here. And there are a few things that could potentially contribute to that feeling. I don't think the racket face is open all the time, but it certainly is not in the perfect position that we could have. So the first thing that I want to point out is that the contact point varies quite a bit in terms of height, and then also in terms of distance to the body. So this here is pretty low. This is below hip, so I'm just going to mark this here. And you also see that it is barely, if at all, in front of the left hip. So that definitely is a little too late, and that could contribute to the feeling that you're rushed to get the racket into position, and the racket face then is open because you're not having a very fluid and round motion, especially not one that can get under the ball, which helps a lot more with having that racket face closed or at least neutral. So this is the one height of the first ball. The second one is probably even lower. And then we have a really low one. I want to say you probably catch it about here. So we don't have enough frames on the video here to really show the exact contact point. But if I'm then continuing to move it through, there's a higher one and you're getting a little jammed. So that's about here. And to my mind, this is probably the best one that you're hitting. So we see that here, you have it between hip and shoulder, and that's where you want to keep the balls. And that is footwork. So on shorter balls, we'll go back to the shorter one in a second, you want to move up. And on some of the higher ones, it's no bad thing to actually give yourself some more space. What I also like the best on this one is you catch it a little bit more in front of your body. So we see that here in reference to the left hip, and you clearly see that your racket face here is neutral, and then you're coming over the ball here. So we clearly see that here, it doesn't open at all. And I like that follow through as well. So the first thing really that I'm seeing with all of that is a little bit of a lack of footwork, to be quite honest. So on this one here, you're really just stretching, right? And that's where it feels that the racket face has to open to get to the ball. So give it one or two more steps. I like how you're getting up to the ball here with that slight shuffle step, but it has to be further out so that you're catching the ball again between hip and shoulder. The biggest issue that I think that contributes to the slightly late contact point is that you have a little bit of a weight in your swing. There's a little bit of a position, and I'm going to run this, and I hope you see that here, where you have a pause. And what that does is, about here, it interrupts your swing. And instead of having that milli-split second that the racket would have if you did not have that little, I don't necessarily want to call it a hitch, but it is a little bit of a pause. If you didn't have that, the racket face would basically benefit from gravity, drop lower under the ball, and it makes for a rounder, smoother, and also easier to accelerate through contact point swing. So that is one thing really that you want to work on, that on the take back here, continue to swing. You don't want to have that hold. This one is a little better, but it is still there in all of them. So let's run the next one through, even on the higher one. And I think that's where it becomes very clear then, a little break there, that you're then basically having to play catch up. And the racket face never had the chance to really drop below the wrist and you're then getting jammed. So on this one, you're getting jammed definitely in terms of the distance to your contact point here, because you're barely getting out of the way of the ball almost, I want to say, and you do see that your racket face there is slightly open. So that hitch, if you can manage to get under the ball a little bit more with a more fluid motion, then I think that really will help with the positioning of your racket face on contact point, and that you feel that you have it either in neutral or you even have it closed about 5, 6, 7 degrees. Up to 10 degrees is still okay. Now, there are a few other things that I do want to point out, and I'm going to put you next to Carlos Alcaraz in a second, and then you definitely see what I mean. So you do have your left arm out to take the racket back, but that's about all it does. If you focus on your left shoulder here and your left hip, the arm does not facilitate more of a turn, and that's really the function of the arm. So instead of just sticking that racket out here, ideally I would love to see a little bit more of a turn, and that is starting to store energy. That is producing and creating the energy that you're then releasing as you're coming forward. So let's put Carlos next to you and let's see if we can make that a little clearer. Okay, so here we have Carlos Alcaraz. So let's see what the left shoulder and the left hand really do. And we see that by how much the left hip comes around, and of course the left shoulder. So here is the take back here. So he really, really aggressively uses the left arm and left hand, and you see that the left hand is still on the racket right here. So his left hand is still on the racket, whereas yours is releasing here. So the racket position is fairly much the same, but you do see a difference here in how much he coils. And that would be definitely one thing that would help you to generate a little bit more power. And of course, more topspin, because the more velocity you have on the racket with a lower racket head drop, the more you can swing up, and that gives you a lot more topspin rotation, gives you height over the net, and it gets the ball in, right? That's what we want. Now, the other thing that you're seeing here, of course, is the load of the outside leg. So really good coil here, and then you do see how that energy gets released as the right side, the hip, and then the shoulder comes around. And we do see that here, that the contact point also is further in front. And if I'm letting all his forehands run in this sequence here, you see that he catches even the lowest one, still gilks maybe a little bit below hip. If I can slow this down here enough. But every other forehand that he hits is definitely between hip and shoulder, and that is footwork. So coming back to this position, I think this is a really good comparison here. When the hands separate, this is where his hands start, or the racket and the hands start to separate, and you see how far that left arm is. So it's definitely way past his midline, and you're separate here. So that is where you can really use that left hand and get more load onto the ball. And you see that all the forehands that he's hitting between hip and shoulder. So that he catches about there. Again, not enough frames on this. This again, he catches around his belly button, I want to say, about here. It's the best I can do here. And then on the next one, you see that he's moving up a little bit, right? So it's about this ground that he covers, and that allows him to keep more balls in better contact points in terms of height. And of course, in terms of distance to the ball, you also see that he's hitting it well in front of his left hip here, in front of his left leg. So there's good weight transfer into the ball, but really the most important is how he loads and how he can use that angular movement to create a heck lot of topspin. And for sure, the racket face will stay closed. As you see that here, as he's coming up, the racket face is already a little closed. And you see that here on the forward swing, on the upswing, the racket face is already slightly closed. So that's the benefit, of course, of the closed racket face. You get a heck of a lot of topspin, which keeps the ball in play, gives you really great net clearance, which helps you with safety of the ball. There's one other thing that I want to show you, which I don't necessarily think has any impact, but I'm just wondering if you're aware of it. So let's go back to your take back here. You are actually letting go of your hand a little bit. So you see that here, right there. So your fingers are coming off the grip. So I don't necessarily think it has any negative impact. However, I definitely don't see any benefits to it. To recap what you want to work on, try to have a more continuous motion here. So I'm letting this run one more time. So you see that right here, there was that little wait, that little pause. So again, one continuous motion because you want to get under the ball more. And of course, you can always use your legs a lot more, which also leads me to the next one, the loading, which was the left hand can be more active in really bringing that right shoulder, right hip around, which then also allows you to really get a little lower and use your outside leg here, in that case, your right leg, to load more and drop a little bit more racket head, and your entire body drops. And that, again, of course, helps with coming up to the contact point with a little bit more of a steeper swing. I do have a video on how to get more topspin on the ball. I will reference that in the description. Then let's continue. The next thing to work on is really that you're working on moving up to shorter balls. I think this is a pretty good example because you're just a little bit too low on the contact point here. This is below a hip, and you want to keep them below shoulder and above your hip. And then we had one more, and that is the letting go of the racket there. And I think that's a pretty good video here, or a pretty good picture there that you see that there. I don't think there's any benefit to it. So see if you can work with that grip and stay in your grip.